friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today it is well past time for me to tell you about the books that I read in the month of January. Overall, I had a fantastic start to my 2019 reading life. I read 12 books, 5 of which were recommended to me by you guys. In my 2019 goals video, I asked for recommendations and I had so many responses, and 5 of the books I read in January. So I'm pleased to be making progress on that list. I had 4 5-star reads in the month of January, which is also fantastic, but there are 12 books here, so I'm just gonna jump right in and start telling you about the books. The first book that I read during the month already had to be returned to the library, and that is Transcription by Kate Atkinson. This is the first Kate Atkinson book that I have read. I've heard a lot of positive things about her as an author. I unfortunately didn't love this book. I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. It does take place during World War II about a young 18-year-old girl who kind of becomes part of the world of spying, and she transcribes conversations she transcribes conversations. I did not like the main character at all. I felt like I wasn't really interested in the action, and it was a little bit slower paced. Yeah, I just didn't think that it lived up to the hype. I don't feel like it had a ton of hype. I don't necessarily think it was overhyped. I just didn't think that it was the book for me. It was just kind of okay. The second book that I finished in the month of January is The Heiress of Winterwood. This is a Christian fiction by Sarah Ladd, and it turns out I already read this book in 2014. When I went to add it on Goodreads as read this time, I realized that I had already read it. And that doesn't say very much for this book, does it? Because even while I was reading it all the way through, I didn't get those memories. Sometimes when I reread a book, it's like, I already don't have a good memory, but usually when I reread a book, I can kind of have those feelings. Oh yeah, that's what happened. I didn't even know until I added it on Goodreads that I had read it before. That's pretty sad. And here we are a week into February, and I don't really remember very much about this book. When I read it, I really enjoyed it. It is about this young woman, Amelia, who is going to inherit her family's estate, Winterwood. She has a friend who was of a lower class who she promises to raise this girl's, her friend's baby daughter. Her friend gets ill and dies at the very beginning of this book, and she spends over a year caring for this young girl. Now, when the story picks up, she is engaged to be married to a man who doesn't want her to continue caring for this young girl, and she has to fight to make that happen. She also starts a friendship of sorts with a neighbor who's a colonel, comes back from a war, or from fighting or something. A sea captain. He's a sea captain. See, I don't even remember. I found it to be interesting. There's a little bit of mystery, a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of romance, of course, and it was a good read while I read it, but still only 3 stars and somewhat forgettable. Next, I finished my Goodreads read-along pick for the month, which was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. Now, here's another book that is very highly hyped, and I really did enjoy this. This takes place in Russia, and it's very heavily based on Russian folklore, and you could really feel kind of a fairy tale vibe while reading it. So we follow Vasya, who's a young girl who lives out in like the middle of nowhere in really freezing cold Russia. She has the ability to see these spirits, both like house spirits and like a river spirit and in the woods. Not everybody has this ability, and it's often looked down upon for her to talk about them even. Some people think they're just legends and old stories, but apparently they're very real. So in this book, we have a little bit of discussion about good and evil. I really loved the vibe of this book. I ultimately gave this one 4 stars. I had a little bit of a hard time. They call the house spirits demons in this book, and I don't think that they're meant to be spiritual. Like, as a believer, I believe demons are a real thing, and I don't believe these are more like folktale. I kind of picture these house demons as like a Dobby from Harry Potter, or even like a garden gnome. And that's kind of how they're described. And yet it was hard for me to make that distinction in my mind. I don't know how to, I'm not describing that very well, but I gave this 4 stars, not 5, but it was very, very interesting. I loved the writing, and I definitely plan on continuing with this trilogy. Then I read my first 5-star of the year, and that was Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. I can't believe I hadn't read this before. I actually thought that I did at one point, but never did. I have seen the Lifetime or HBO, I forget where Showtime, something. I have seen the miniseries adaptation of this, so while reading it, I was picturing those characters, which some good, some bad to that, but I really enjoyed the way that this was written. I thought it was a fun kind of, not a gritty thriller, but there are a little bit of mystery thriller elements to this. We followed all of these moms and a bullying incident in the kindergarten, and the moms kind of all take sides. And at one point there is a murder, and who did it and who's guilty. And it was a lot of fun, which I really liked. I liked the little snippets of interviews that were at the end of most of the chapters, if not all the chapters. I definitely really enjoyed this read. Next, I finished another 5-star read, and I buddy read this with one of my subscribers, Berna, and I loved buddy reading with her. This is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden, and I absolutely loved this book. I found the descriptions to be so vivid and carried me right to Japan and the life of a geisha and what that was like. In this book, we follow Chiyo, whose name is changed to Sayuri as she becomes a geisha. We follow her from when she's quite young in her family's household and how she gets taken from there and brought to another town that is known for its geisha. She becomes the servant in this household and eventually becomes a geisha. She has quite an obsession with a man who was kind to her when she was a young girl, and everything that she does revolves around this obsession. She has a lot of hopes for a potential relationship with this man as she gets older, but that is not necessarily how things go as a geisha. So I really loved learning about geisha lifestyle and this time in history in Japan, and I thought Arthur Golden did a fabulous job of describing things to me as the reader without being too detailed, not too detailed, but too caught up in the details that it became boring. I was definitely very invested and very interested. At times I thought Sayuri was a little naive and somewhat frustrating because of her naivety, but yeah, overall I just thought that this was spectacular. And I ended up watching the movie recently as well and really enjoyed the movie. They made a few changes that make sense, I guess, based on the ending of the book, but veered away from the essence of the book. So I thought that while the adaptation was good, obviously the book is better, which is usually the case. The next book that I read was very interesting. I have never read a book like this before. It is The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka, and this is not a very long book. It's actually quite short. This tells the story of Japanese women who come to America as mail order brides. It follows their history from when they come as young women all the way until post-World War II during the internment camps when Japanese were rounded up and put into camps. This is told in first person plural, like we and us. And we don't follow any specific characters. We follow this group of women as a whole. So which was a very interesting writing choice, writing style. It prevented me from feeling like I connected with any of the characters, which is something that I really love. So I didn't get emotionally invested in this story. However, I still found it to be riveting. I thought the writing was very almost poetic because of the way that it was told. Deals with racism and the struggles that these women faced as they became wives and as they became mothers and as they had jobs and some were cleaners in other people's houses, some worked out in the fields with their husbands. It talks about their marriage issues and trying to become a part of their communities, and then how they all kind of disappeared. And during that last section, we switch perspective to the rest of the neighbors and how the Japanese people just disappeared, and what that was like. Very interesting. I do definitely recommend this. I gave it 4 stars, but it was just a very different read for me. Typically, I like to read books where I can get very engaged with the characters and feel emotions, whatever they're feeling. And I did feel some emotions while reading this, but it was a very different kind of a feeling. Yeah, it's a very different book, but I still think that it was an important read, and I'm glad that I picked it up. Then I finished my next 5-star read of the month, and this was also one of the recommendations and another buddy read, and that is We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. This is a World War II historical fiction, and I loved it. In this novel, we follow Georgia Hunter's grandfather and his siblings and her great-grandparents. So we follow her ancestors and what happened to them during World War II. They began in this town in Poland, and from there, how they all kind of went different places. One of the brothers was actually in France at the time that the war started. The rest of them were mostly in Poland. But in this book, we travel to Poland and Germany and France. The one in France goes to Northern Africa and then ultimately Brazil. So we kind of travel to, and one goes to Siberia, gets shipped off in a Russian train to a work camp in Siberia. So we travel in Palestine and the Middle East as well. We really travel the globe in this book, which is pretty spectacular. There were 5 children in the family, 5 or 6, now that I think about it. There is a family tree at the beginning, which was really helpful at the beginning as we were getting to know the different characters. Once I kind of knew who everybody was, yeah, there's 5 children. 5 children, but also their husbands or wives or significant others, plus the parents. Once you got to know the different characters, I didn't need to refer to that family tree anymore, but it was really helpful at the beginning to just kind of get the birth order, like who are we talking about and where are they in this family. I really loved the development of the characters throughout this story. The one in particular, the youngest daughter, started out kind of being spoiled and entitled a little bit, but she ends up being one of the ones who helps hold the family together and super strong. The things that this family had to face was incredible, which is true of most people who lived during World War II. The one thing that I didn't particularly love, but it wasn't bad enough to knock off a star, the structure of this book is that each chapter focuses on one of the different family members in a specific situation, and then we have kind of these little snippets of big picture timeline, what's going on in the war at the time of these focused in situations. So we focus in on a story, something that happened, and then we come back out to these snippets of, in the big picture, this is what's going on. And then the next chapter we focus in on a situation, then we get this big picture. So because of that, there's a little bit of abrupt jumping between the chapters. So we get this focused in situation, but then another few months or 8 months or a year might have passed when we move to the next chapter. So there is a little bit of abruptness there where we kind of miss some of that in-between stuff. However, I still thought that it was spectacular, and I gave it 5 stars. I am participating in the Betsy-Tacy read-along for 2019, and so I read the first Betsy-Tacy by Maud Hart Lovelace, and I also read Betsy-Tacy and Tib by Maud Hart Lovelace. This is actually a library book, which I think is so cool because it's like old school. And this, unfortunately, I got from Book Outlet, and it's large print, which I'm not planning to keep this one. And this one is overdue at the library, so I need to return this one very soon. But these are just really fun. I believe there's like 10 books in this series, and it starts with Betsy and her friend Tacy, and we see how they meet. They are, I think, 5 years old in this first book, and then 7 or 8 in this second book. And as the series goes on, the girls keep getting bigger and bigger. Older and older, I should say. They are such good friends, and they get into a lot of fun adventures and scrapes, and their imagination is just spectacular. It definitely reminds me of being a little girl and what that was like. I can't believe that I never read these when I was a younger girl, because they definitely are books that I would love. I think I gave these first two both 3 stars. They did read very young, which I don't mind, but I am looking forward to them growing up. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing this readathon throughout the year. I read another middle grade book next, and I read this because at the beginning of January I watched The Newsies, the musical The Newsies, with a friend, and I had seen it before, but I really enjoyed that, and afterwards went on a hunt to find books that were written about the newsboys strike and kind of a revolution that they had. And I didn't find anything, which is surprising to me because it seems to me like it would just be the perfect historical fiction topic. So those of you who are writers, get on that, please. Let me know because I would love to read it. I did find a historical fiction called City of Orphans by Avi, who is a popular middle grade author. I think one of his more popular books is Crispin, which I haven't read, but maybe this middle grade March I'll pick that up. In this book, the main character is a newsboy, Max. We follow Max, we meet his whole family, and Max is a newsboy. He's trying to avoid these kind of thugs who are bullying the newsboys, and one day when he's about to get beaten up by these older boys who are trying to bully the newsboys, he meets this girl, what's her name, Willa, who kind of rescues him from them, and Willa and Max become really good friends, and Willa is an orphan living on the streets, and Max's family kind of takes her under their wing a little bit, gives her food and shelter, and it's just their story. It's about life in the late 1800s as an immigrant family in New York City. I really, really enjoyed this book. I love middle grade anyways, and I love historical fiction, so this was a fun combination of the two of those things. Definitely thought that this was great. I think I gave it 4 stars. Yes. And the final book that I read in January, I absolutely loved. It was my 4th 5-star read of the month, and it was a book from my series shelf, which I don't want to go a month without reading at least one of those because I need to continue. And this actually wraps up a companion series, and it's Brit Marie Was Here by Fredrik Backman. And you can't really call it a series, but Brit Marie is one of the characters in My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Fredrik Backman, and this just tells Brit Marie's story. She gets a job from the unemployment agency as the caretaker of this recreation center in this don't blink your eyes, it'll be gone town. Barely a town, dying town, no industry, people are moving away, and befriends some of the people in the town, befriends the kids who are passionate about soccer. Soccer is actually a huge element of this book, which was a lot of fun. I played soccer in high school, so it was kind of fun to reach back into those days. Brit Marie herself is kind of an ornery, slightly OCD, possibly socially awkward character who has a lot of heart, who is incredibly loyal and funny. She's funny. Backman, I always say this, I think Backman is my favorite character writer. I just absolutely love the characters that he writes. But just like some of his other books as well, there were some very poignant quotes in here, very poignant moments where they were just incredibly profound things that Brit Marie was realizing about herself, about other people. And I found this to be a story of Brit Marie kind of recognizing who she is. Her big fear is that she's going to die alone. And that's what instigates or motivates her to go and find a job to begin with, because she is having a rough patch in her marriage and doesn't have many, if any, friends at the start of this book. But by the end, she becomes a big part of this community where she lands, and she was there, and people will notice that she was there, and this was just so beautiful. I really, really loved it. And if you haven't read any Fredrik Backman, I definitely would recommend it. I've loved everything that I've read from him. So yeah, this was a great way to end my January. And I do have one more. I read an audiobook, and it was The Optimist's Guide to Letting Go by Amy Richman, I think. I'll put the picture here. I listened to this one on audio during my drastic fail of 24 and 48 readathon. I got sick that weekend, and I did actually read both of the Betsy-Tacy books, and I listened to an audiobook. So I guess it wasn't a total fail, but I got nowhere near 24 hours because I was a mess, which is why I didn't vlog that weekend. I was really hoping to. I started it, but then, I mean, when I get sick, my eyes are puffy and watery. I couldn't stop sneezing. It was miserable. So I thought an audiobook would be helpful, and it was, and I really enjoyed it while I was listening to it, but I don't remember any of it. And I think that's partly because I was sick, and so I may have fallen asleep during some parts of the audiobook, and I always caught myself and went back if that happened. But honestly, right now, I can't tell you about this book. So I'll put a link to it down below, because I do remember really liking it. I know that it was a family drama. It involved this mother and her daughter, grown daughter and her mother, a grown woman and her mother, I'll say that, and family drama, contemporary. And when I first finished it, I wanted to give it 4 stars, but quickly realized I don't really remember very much about it, so I lowered that to a 3. So there you have that. That is it for my That is it for my January reads. I would love to hear what was your favorite book during the month of January. If you have read any of these books that I read, I would love to chat with you about them in the comments down below. You know I always love talking with you down there. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll definitely be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye!